Podcasters Roundtable round 104. Audio quality, good versus good enough. And our inspired guest roundtabler, she put down in the, when you go to podcastersroundtable.com/guest, you can sign up to be on a roundtable, not this one, a future one. And when you sign up, you should be put into this form that says, tell us some things you want to talk about. And Jane put in one of the things Jane put in was determining acceptable audio quality for your podcast, the difference between perfection and good enough, which is a great topic. I think every podcaster struggles with this, especially in the beginning. Like, they want good audio, or do they know what good audio is? Do you know what bad audio is? Do you push it out there and it gets better over time? There's all kinds of things going on when it comes to audio, and it's not always the easiest thing to do. And yet it doesn't have to be hard or expensive. So anyways, I think there's enough meat on that bone for a good topic, but we'll meet the roundtablers in just a second. Not to bring things way down, but I just want to say that Podcast Roundtable 91, and when was that? April this year. Scott Smith was a roundtabler. Unfortunately, a few weeks ago, or a couple weeks, real recently, he took his life and his wife's as well. So really tragic. We're sad to hear that news. Obviously he was suffering. So, I know that we're friends here, and maybe you come on a roundtable one time and you barely know us, but we're a community. And if you are going through something, even us, hopefully you tell someone close to you, but grab anyone. I mean, even us, we're all here to listen. Like, if you need help, reach out, because that's the worst possible result. So he had daughters, and now they're without parents. So it's really sad. And there is a GoFundMe for the girls, which you can contribute to. And it looks like a lot of people have so far. So that's fantastic. But nothing's ever going to replace that. So they need a lot of help. I will put a link in the description for podcastersroundtable.com/104 if you want to contribute to that. That would be amazing. So sad, but reach out for sure. All right, you guys, we'll try to bring it back up here. And let's meet the roundtable. Dave, co-host extraordinaire, welcome back, buddy.
Yeah, Dave Jackson from the schoolofpodcasting.com. Looking forward to this. I have fun little stories and bumper sticker kind of things that we can throw in here. It'll be fun-filled and exciting.
Bumper. So did you just come here to pitch your products, Dave? Is that
no?
Bumper stickers? Okay, all right. Just making sure. Okay, all right. Hey, new roundtabler Jane, welcome to your first roundtable.
Hi, thank you for having me. So I'm Jane Ellen, and I have a podcast called Glistening Particles, where I talk to pretty much random people that I barely meet about 10 minutes before I get on the air with them, and hear their really inspiring stories. And hopefully everyone will check it out.
Cool. It's like the roundtable minus the inspiring stories here at the roundtable. If no inspiring stories. No,
there'll be plenty. There'll be plenty. Yeah.
And
thank you.
Maybe 2-time roundtable, a second time back, third time. Tyler, welcome back.
Hi, thanks. I'm just here to keep things interesting. Last time I think I was late, and this time I bring all the technical issues.
So he's got this beautiful mic sitting in front of him, the same one that you see sitting in front of me. And he's also wearing earbuds just like me, except I'm listening through mine, and Tyler's actually listening and communicating. So, but guess what? Oh, I totally peaked the audio there. Guess what? Tyler's audio is good enough, right?
I hope I make a perfect example of what this episode's supposed to be all about. And just before I logged in here, my mic, more or less, you guys tell me, completely wasn't working. I tested it on my own, thought I had it all set up, and of course, it was not working at all. So here we are using the traditional iPod headphone route.
Yeah, and Jane's using them too, and they actually sound fantastic. They are certainly good enough for something like that. I think that maybe Jane's voice is just superior to Tyler's because she sounds amazing coming through.
No, I have a mic. I have this.
Oh,
is that what you're using?
The tiny Shure. Yeah, it's a baby. It's a baby Shure.
You missed the earbuds. It sounds fantastic.
No, I have a mic. Yeah,
how far away is that from you?
It's like 8 inches, 8 inches.
That's impressive.
Yeah, and actually, I have a collection of mics that I've collected over the last couple of years. And this is the least expensive and what I would call the most rinky-tink in size because it's really light,
Yeah.
but
I
it
mean,
actually makes my voice sound the best.
It's a Blue Snowball ripoff, it looks like, except that it sounds
Yeah.
really good. I'm
It's like
impressed. Except when you
Shure. I
make
think it's
around.
MV5. Yeah, I know. I should stop doing that. Sorry about that.
Just kidding. That we know, we have to know. It's a Shure MV5, is that what you said? We'll
Yeah.
link it up in the description.
Okay. Yeah, I love it. Actually, it's my favorite of all of the ones I have. It does the best work with my voice.
I'm super impressed with the way it
Yeah.
sounds. Dave, I mean, like a mic that's 6 to 8 inches away from your mouth, it really shouldn't sound that great.
No, you should sound like you're in a bathtub or bathroom or something with reverb, and that sounds great.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing.
Yeah. No, he's saying you should sound like you're in a bathroom.
Oh,
So
okay.
It did sound like that. It did sound like that.
Because I'm not in the bathroom. I was trying to make sure that was clear back here.
Definitely not in the bathroom. All right. So, well, let me ask you, Jane, when you wrote this down, actually, I don't think it was that long ago. You probably haven't been on the list terribly long. Some of you have. I'm sorry.
Only 17 months, but whatever.
Yeah,
No, I'm just kidding. No, it's been like 4 months.
Do you remember why this is one of the things you listed?
Right. So most of the time I do my recordings over Skype using call recorder because I talk with people around the world. So I haven't quite got the travel budget on my podcast to go to visit everyone in person. So it works really well for that. But then there are times where I'm doing some live in person, not live, but in person recordings. And one of them was in a coffee shop. And that was a heck of a time trying to get that cleaned up and sound good because the people behind me, I didn't pay attention to what was behind me. I paid attention to what was behind the person I was interviewing. But the people behind me were having like a 4-woman school create some sort of big project thing. So it was just like chatter, 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 chatter. And then the other thing is I recorded at an Airbnb and it was really high ceilings. And you could totally tell that sound. So when I started my podcast, I was really obsessive about trying to learn everything about sound and microphones. And I wanted to spend all this money. And ultimately, I learned that just a few things can make it sound really good, and good is good enough. You got to get to that point where it's good enough.
For sure, yeah. So
was that too long of an answer? It sounded really long now that I stopped finally.
You didn't start with your like back in 1987 because sometimes we get like the life story before.
No, that's not happening. That's not going to happen here.
So Tyler, I see you sitting in front of the Heil PR40, but which I assume is your regular microphone. But is that where you started?
No, it's definitely not where I started, but I did start kind of just messing with, I always wished I could play instruments better than I could. So the technology of recording stuff was actually what I was able to kind of master more. So I'd like record myself very poorly playing guitar. And then I realized, you know what, I can speak better than I can play an instrument. So how about I try podcasting instead? So I had like a Shure SM57, and that's kind of the cheap, it's not cheap, but it's the everything music mic.
It's good enough for you.
Yeah, right.
But that's what you hear.
It's like it's the every rock star kind of mic, right? It's like $150, and I've run it into a really cheap preamp, USB preamp, and then now, I have the Heil and a Focusrite Scarlett 6i6 that you're not hearing any of right now. And this isn't the first time that this has happened, and not with this specific setup, but just as you pile things on, your chances of something going wrong really quickly increase. Add a USB mic, it gets a little worse. Add a mixer and a real mic, and basically then you just want to never touch anything on your desk. And unfortunately, I've had to format my computer recently to have a hard drive replaced. So I bet this is just, a bug that I haven't run into yet. So
yeah, and it is as you increase your attempt at quality to improve the quality, it actually gets harder, right? There's more things, like you said, and there's more stuff in the audio chain, so to speak. I mean, if you're watching this podcast at roundtable.com/live, if you're watching it, you'll see that I also have a Heil PR40, but that goes right now. It's crazy because it's going into a compressor DBX, and then it's going into a mixer, and then that's coming out into the audio interface. I mean, there's just all these places where it could go bad. As opposed to for most of this show, I use the ATR 2100, and I would go direct USB. In fact, I asked Tyler if he had one because it's sounds fantastic, and it's just USB to microphone. And if that doesn't work that way, then something's just wrong with your mic or your computer. I mean, it's not a lot to diagnose. In this case, we had Tyler like rip out. They're like, hey, take the mixer out of the equation, take this out of the equation. And it was time to go. So we went with earbuds. They're good enough, right? So the whole point. So I guess that makes me think, what is bad audio? Where do we hit good enough? In this case, well, Tyler, just to communicate, we started with your onboard microphone, and someone said, Jane, what did you say? What was
it sounded like a toilet was continually flushing in the background.
Right. And I don't even know what was going, like, it's just like this warble you get. I mean, the onboard microphone, they're just really bad, right? I would say that's not good enough.
Yeah, never good enough. There's one episode of my podcast where I had selected the wrong input. Again, that, adding more things to the chain, I had all my guests' input selected correctly. Mine was the internal computer, so I'm sitting 3 feet away, and I kind of felt too bad to let the episode disappear because they had given me this time to talk, and so I put it out there in the world with me, the host, sounding terrible, and my guests sounding great. So yeah, there are many things that can go wrong, which is why I'm always jealous watching your Instagram stories. So I mean, if anybody doesn't watch Ray's Instagram stories, they're fantastic for seeing him set up his in-home studio, because it just stays that way. Once you get it working,
Mm-hmm.
And I'm always like moving stuff around.
No way, dude. I wish it was that way. Like, I have to reset up. This episode is a few minutes late, probably because part of it I was like, wait, it's been too long since the last roundtable. It's been too long when I can't figure out where do I plug that thing in to make it record in this weird, like, it's been too many weeks when I can't remember how to set up the thing. So even though I have a dedicated space for this stuff, I still find myself unplugging and replugging in for different setups. It's crazy, right? And so in a lot of cases, it's better to just have a USB mic. And again, I said it doesn't have to be expensive and it doesn't have to be hard. That ATR 2100 is a fantastic mic. It's a great place to start. It's easy, right? It's easy to learn. It's easy to figure out. And I mean, that's sure that you have right there, Jane. That's USB, right? It goes right into your computer, and it sounds amazing.
So how much is the one the ATR 2100? How much does that run? Because this was about $100, I think.
It's sub 100. You can get it on sale for like $60 to $70.
I know, isn't that crazy? Like, people think it has to be so expensive, and these cheaper ones are the ones we can rely on most of the time.
And that's got a lifetime warranty. So, I mean, so many times if you break something that's sub 100, you're like, just buy another one. And it's like, you can actually ship it back and they'll give you a new one. So
nice.
That's awesome.
But Dave, when do you remember recording like a horribly sounding audio or episode, and did you publish it, or what did you do?
I've had a couple where it was either a Skype issue or something like that. I did one where, again, kind of like Tyler's, where the guest sounded great. I sounded horrible. And I actually went in and re-recorded my questions and put them back in. So you didn't really notice.
It took you like 10.5 hours.
Yeah, it was like 2 weeks later, I was ready to publish it. So that was...
So it was not good enough for you. You took a drastic measure and sort of overdubbed. You did ADR, the movie term, for your podcast, essentially.
Yeah.
I've done that too, though. I've done that where my audio was really bad, and it was using a different version of Skype for Business, and it doesn't have the same recorder built in, and it was so bad. So I couldn't put it out that way. So that one I had to clean up my part, but theirs sounded great.
So that's the tough balance here, right? Like, when is good enough? Like, have you ever scrapped an episode because just not published it because of some technical issue, usually with the audio?
I have actually, it's one of my favorite episodes too, and I don't think I can really recreate it. And it was one of my first ones I recorded when I really didn't know what I was doing yet. And I think I was using, I think I was using Zoom or something like that to record it, and the quality was just so bad I couldn't use it. And it was so disappointing because it was hysterical.
You didn't. Oh, well, then that's hard to recreate. I mean, you didn't ask. Was it you and a guest? It was a guest.
It was a guest.
Ask them to do it again.
Right. We tried doing it again, but then we did it worse because I was out in Portland with him and a bunch of his friends, and we tried to do a recording for a podcast with 5 people in the room with like 2 mics, and that didn't work very well at all.
So that is a tougher situation, right? When you have more people in a room. Dave, have you ever tried to record multiple people?
Yeah, I got hired once to do a recording at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. There was this big shindig, and they had a bunch of CEOs coming in, and there were 5 people in a room, and the ceiling was ridiculously high, and they're all around a boardroom, so I don't have to worry too much about bleed. But it's just this big echo chamber. And then I'm having to tell everybody, the microphone is your friend, stay next to the microphone and that whole 9 yards. And what I was actually doing, luckily you had one MC who would ask somebody a question and then they would answer. And then no, it wasn't like a round table. People didn't chime in. They spoke when they were spoken to. So what I was actually doing is on the board, I was actually, when people weren't talking, I was bringing down their fader and I would just watch to see who's going to touch next. And I was
that's hard to do
big time. And, yeah, that could have gone really. That was one of those things I'm like, this is going to either work or I'm going to be very embarrassed. One of the two. So luckily, but that was one that was a little tough. But I hear people, especially with a Blue Yeti, they think they can get away with a Blue Yeti in the middle of the table, and that's one of the lines that I go, nope, not for me. I can't.
Yeah, I mean, you could essentially put your phone on a recorder and set it down on the table and get, I mean, at that point, if you're far enough away from the microphone, it's going to sound the same. Like people are in a room and they're nowhere near the source that's recording, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if someone's hiring you for it, that's not going to be.
I've done what I call the Bob Barker, where I don't have time to go get a recorder and I'll just talk into my phone, get the voice memo, and then when they talk, I stick my mic in front of their face and you just pass it back and forth.
And in that case, good enough, right?
Yeah, it was good enough. Right. And what you usually do in a case like that is I will announce the elephant in the room. I'll be like, I'm on the floor at PodCon, Cheryl. And that just kind of, people know that's why there's weird noises in the background.
Yeah. Tyler, let's see if you can do this. What would you define as bad audio? What's bad audio to you?
Right.
Uh-oh. Did he try? He could not resist. He wanted to get his good audio back in, and it's not happening. So let me answer the question for Tyler. That is bad audio.
I just needed to show you guys what it sounded like.
Oh, okay. It sounds like
I switched computers just so I could take a chance that maybe I could fix it. So this is on a whole different machine. And
that's amazing. So wow, really weird. Then that's very odd.
Yeah, it's something's going on that is
I think we need to go back to the cat theory that your cat shoots. That's my theory.
Shoot on my Bluetooth.
Yeah.
Well,
I will say, ironically also though, but that computer even sounds different on the earbuds.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh,
we're getting a
because it's using a different preamp. Is this better or worse?
Is it using I would say it's not. It's not as good.
Not as good.
Oh, come on.
we set this up. We made sure that Tyler would have trouble, and
you guys are
the
good.
fall guy here.
You are. What would you say is bad? What would you define as bad audio? If you're listening to a podcast and you're like, that's just not good audio.
There's a lot of bad. There's a lot of bad out there. I think probably the worst that I hear a lot of beginners do is not concern themselves with proximity to the microphone, which is why this is passable right now at all. Like, I know this isn't good, how you hear me, but the only reason it's at all usable is because this microphone is 1 or 2 inches from my mouth. That's the whole reason. And so podcasters will go out and get a decent microphone. I was talking to a girl recently that was starting her own, and she was renting the gear. So it was all really good gear, but she hadn't quite learned how important it was to face the microphone yet. So listening in the car, anytime this group of people in a room would look away, you would totally hear that person drop off. And then you just can't follow the conversation. So when they're on access to the microphone, it's acceptable because I can understand, it sounds great actually. And they go off axis and it's unusable because I don't know what people are saying. I can't tell who's speaking. So even sometimes a phone call can be better if you can understand the person. The worst case is just non-comprehension.
Yeah, I listened to a show. It was Barry Katz. I think he's fixed this. Barry Katz is a famous manager he's managed every comedian on the planet. And the show was called Industry Standard. And Barry would bring them into his office and they would sit there with Shure SM58s holding them in their lap. And inevitably somebody would forget and they would slowly put the mic further and further away from their mouth. And so you'd have to turn it up to hear the guest, and then Barry would come back on. Well, he's got the microphone up next to his mouth, and he would just blow. I remember listening to the car, thinking my windows were just going to shatter and go out. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I recently was on tour with a podcast, and definitely had some challenges. And we do at the end of the show, there's a guest Q&A, and we go out in the audience, and normal people grab a microphone, and inevitably they'll fall down here or something else. And I'm, front of house waving my arms, like tell them to get the microphone up. Well, fortunately, I stuck a producer right next to that person and said, it is your job to literally shove the mic, like don't break teeth, but bring it up. And she did a great job at doing that. And it made all the difference because, something like you're saying SM58, you get just a little distance from it and it's got so much rejection and it's a dynamic microphone and you need to be on top of that microphone. And so that can be tough. And, we did a show, it was a podcast, and they decided because we were at this theater and a live show last minute, maybe a couple days before, and they said, hey, what we're going to do is we're going to have 12 a cappella singers sing the intro song. So we're going to need you to mic that. And in this kind of tour, like theaters, like all my stuff's ordered. And you would think the theaters are just equipped with all this stuff. They're not. Everyone, you bring in all your stuff. Like this was new to me and finding out that they just didn't have stuff on hand. They have some stuff. But I had to scramble for mics, man. And it really came down to what was good enough. They're telling me, hey, ideally, every guy would have a headset. And I said, that's not happening. Like between the wireless and the head, that's just not happening. So I got two KSM 32s, I think they are. They're hypercardioid condenser microphones, whatever. Stuck two of them, pointed them out towards, I put the guys in a semicircle, 10 of them, and pointed those mics and told them to project as loud as possible. And I gave the two guys on the ends handhelds because one guy was like a beatboxer, and the other guy was like the bass. And so, with 4 microphones for 12 people, it wasn't great, but it was definitely good enough. And it was just for the theme song. So sometimes you have to scramble and figure out, how do I get enough microphones? You might be, same situation happened. We had to record ads. I had 3 handheld microphones. I scrambled in my gear bag and found a shotgun microphone for video. And I put a giant windscreen on it. And I told the guy to hold it still. And he recorded ads that way. And it sounded great. So you do sometimes have to figure out, how do I take the situation I'm in and make it a little better? And like Dave, you're saying, fortunately, we all have microphones and recorders with us now. And like Tyler's saying, if you, with the earbuds or even the microphones on these are good if you get close, right? And so get it close. Proximity is a huge thing. But then you have other issues that come into play when you get close to the microphone. Plosives, which is the air on the microphone. Would that be, you got it close, it sounds good, but now it's full of plosives. Is that good enough? So you have to, I think, having a little bit of knowledge about how to produce at least decent sounding audio. Or, I always say that people don't know what bad audio is until they actually hear it, right? Or totally. Until they hear really good audio, right? So these days in podcasting, Dave, when we started out, it was stick mics and like it was terrible, and you didn't really know from one show to another. And then you have NPR and all those guys come on the scene, and you're like, whoa, that's what it's supposed to sound like? Not supposed to, but you hear really good audio. And then if you're a podcast, the beauty is the playing field is level, right? You can be right next to an NPR show in iTunes if your show is really good and people find it and subscribe and all that stuff. But if they subscribe to a show from NPR or a show from any big network, and then they listen to your podcast, there's a huge drop off. That's a potential problem. If you are being the human compressor where you're turning it up and turning it down to hear, that's not good audio. So the audio can actually take a bad turn after it's recorded as well, I guess.
I had an example. I just listened to a show. I do a show called the Podcast Rodeo Show where I grab random podcasts and see how long I can hang on. And this
wait, what? How does that go?
PodcastRodeoShow.com.
Okay.
8 seconds.
Okay.
And so this podcast came on and it had the deep voice man explaining what was becoming on the episode and this week and such and such and such and cool music and high energy and we're ready to go. And then the host came on and she was doing some sort of interview over the phone, but I swear she was underwater. It was just like, thank you for I was like, and the problem was, in the same way that sometimes loud doesn't sound loud until you put it next to something soft, this audio may not have sounded quite as bad, although it was pretty bad. But it started off with this cool, professional intro, and it just made it sound 10 times worse. And I was just like, I lasted about 4 seconds. As soon as she came on, I'm like, nope, too many podcasts to listen to, friends don't let friends listen to bad audio. So I tuned out immediately.
That's an interesting one because I hear that all the time where people will pay for a professionally produced intro and you're like, all right. And then the podcast starts like, whoa, are they on their phone in a bathroom 10 feet away? Like the drop off is so different. You make it painfully obvious.
Yeah.
You show the audience what really good audio is, and then immediately what really bad audio is.
There's another interesting way to work with that you'll see NPR doing. It's really hyper-produced shows where they're capturing field recordings that are often, mediocre at best. And then in the storytelling, they frame the structure of like, and now we're on location. And then it cuts to this location audio that's worse, and you kind of accept it a little more. There's like a pre-apology, and your brain is just like, oh, it's supposed to sound noisy and rustly, and there's stuff in the background. And then they come back to the studio, and you feel comfortable with that whole interaction instead of sitting in a noisy coffee shop for an hour and a half of friends chatting. That's much more challenging to stick with.
Yeah, I think that this is something that every podcaster faces who does interviews, because you have Skype and you can't, you don't send necessarily, sometimes you might, but most of the time you don't send an audio setup to your guests. So you're at the mercy of what they have, right? And I think I saw it in the comments that, people are used to, because of the radio, they're used to call-in shows on phones. They're used to the guest maybe not sounding as good or being on a phone, but not as much the host. I think you expect a little bit more from the show itself, at least I would say on a regular basis. Sure, can it happen one or two times where your audio's something went wrong and you had to step in with some other setup and it doesn't sound quite as good? Yeah, it's totally fine. But, I think you should always be trying to at least produce audio that sounds, I always say don't let the tech get in the way of the content. So yeah, I just don't want, you shouldn't have to notice it. The way a movie is edited, if you notice the editing, you're taking out of the story. If you notice hiss or just complete echo, and if you're concentrating all these problems that that audio might have, you're not really getting the content.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. If anybody doesn't already know about podcastguestguide.com, it's a really great link to send to anybody you're going to invite on that is just, a podcast host got sick of sending the same email to everybody and wrote out the instructions. And it's a really great starting point for anybody that isn't used to recording their own audio. So
I did not know that. That's a cool link.
What is that podcast?
Yeah.
That's guestguide.com.
I'll put that in the show notes as well.
Yeah, it's from the host of Unjustly Maligned, which is a really great show I enjoy. So I found it useful because it's the same stuff I'm going to tell them, and it's the basics. A lot of people aren't going to go buy their new microphone, and even if they do, they might run into the issues that I ran into today if they don't know how to set it up. So, it's a good shortcut.
Gabe Gonzalez in the chat room says, I record my intro and outro live for each episode. My thinking is it will sound consistent with the actual content of the episode. I actually really like this. You can pre-record intros and outros. You're like, I'm saying the same thing every time, but I guarantee you your voice sounds different I have stopped for an hour, come back, and I had one person, they're like, you sound like you recorded this a different time. Like, I did, buddy. Like, what are you listening on? Like the highest fidelity? Yes, I did. Caught me. Like, so I do like, I've got this repetitive thing I say all the time, or even like maybe I have a sponsor and you pre-record the ad read.
That's a big one. I'm really frustrated when I hear the same pre-recorded ad reads, because like this is the you only have to do one thing. They're only paying you to do one thing in this episode. You can at least, give it, even if it's the same ad read. I really appreciate knowing that it's live, and you can tell right away if you listen to the show every week.
Which is, I think, some of the problem with dynamic ad insertion. If it's the same thing where they just wedge it in there to your audio. Obviously, you could record a fresh one all the time, but yeah, I mean, you do. It's funny what you notice as a listener. I mean, we're putting these damn things right in our ears. We hear everything. That's why I think the audio is so important, because you do hear more than if you're, people listen in the car as well, and you'll get away with stuff, but a lot of people plug it right in their ears. But yeah, I think that, it's important to pay a little attention for your content and for the person who's listening. Jane, go ahead. I jumped on top of you.
So one of the things that when I was starting as a new podcaster, I wanted to have this like velvety, perfect sound. I kept thinking I needed to get it perfect. But what I've learned over time is I kind of like the grittiness of the way it sounds for under or not overproduced podcast sound.
Yeah.
The one thing that I do every time though is I do pull out just that like buzz that can be behind audio. So I do a little bit of cleanup, but I do it across the whole recording, not across like in sections and that sort of thing. So it's not noticeable, but to me it is. When I get the final edit ready, I can tell that it's a little bit cleaner, but still has that, you know, someone's doing it at home and they're still giving it a good effort kind of sound.
Yeah, I mean, I think a podcast should be, these are high LPR 40s. To be honest with you, if I record into this microphone, which is like $350 or whatever, and I just release it, to me, it doesn't sound good. This mic needs post-processing. Like
Right.
it just makes you sound muddy and ugly. And I don't want to meet a podcaster in person and be like, whoa, you sound nothing like you do on your show, because
Right.
this is a more personal medium. Like I think
Right.
being natural and having yourself actually come through
Mhm.
in the audio, I think is important for that connection. We're not
Right.
radio people. We're not voice talent. So reproducing as cleanly but your natural sound, I think is good. And don't get me
Right.
wrong, I'm totally guilty of starting out and pushing the bass up way too high and trying to, no one likes, I always say we are the absolute worst people to be working on our audio. I mean, we do post-production and no one likes the way they sound. So they crank up the bass and it's all muddy and it's ugly. And you have to, I feel like it takes time to like find your own self in your audio. It's
the way I always do a bass test is that I had noticed that one of the best podcasts out there, 99% Invisible, his voice happens to fall right in about the same register as my car sounds on the highway I go on all the time. So it sounds perfect in headphones or at home or in any controlled listening environment, but it's just drowned out because he has quite a low voice. And I then was listening back to some of mine and realized I had done the same thing occasionally by mixing myself a bit too low. So now I make sure to not just listen in one environment, but bring the recording into the car before I release it, and make sure that I didn't end up with more bass than my guest, or because it's kind of easier to let myself get overproduced since I have more of the gear than my guest usually does. Actually, could I selfishly ask you, Ray, what do you do to your Heil to improve it? Because I don't do anything to mine. So.
Oh yeah, and maybe that's fine for your voice. For me, I mean, it's the one thing that a Heil needs personally. What I think, in my opinion, that is the one post process that every podcaster not only can do but should do, because post processing is unique to your own setup, right? But everybody can put a high pass or a low cut filter; those are the same thing. So drop out everything below 80 hertz. I mean, the male voice doesn't typically go below 80 hertz, maybe up to 100. I need that muddy. To me, at least on my voice or my setup or wherever I record, whatever it is, the Heil to me, it always sounds muddy. And muddy sounds like you are talking from behind a door. So I will cut out that low end and I'll bring back a little. That low end that you're looking for, it's actually in the mid to lower range. It's not in that super low range bass. It's a mid-range sound, and it's very hard to find. But so I cut that low, the high pass filter, and I bring up just a little bit of the mid range, and it changes. I'm trying to have audition here. I'm like, I want to pull up the frequency to be like, yeah, but if I say it's at 260, you're gonna go and bump 260, and it's gonna sound bad. But I will say the Heil for me, it needs the muddiness dropped out of it. That's number one.
I'm glad to hear that. That's the only thing I do, and it's just in my presets on the master track because I worry about it. So
yeah.
Okay.
So this
they're so long.
What's that?
The frequencies that you're talking about, like 100 hertz and down, those are usually the frequencies that we feel. Like those are the ones that are in a video game that just make the house rumble, but you don't actually them. It's more of, so we don't need those. And you're right, it just muddies up the water.
Muddy waters. So that's where Dave plays guitar. We're just not set up. We're never set up for it, Dave. It really upsets me. How many do we have to do before Dave is just ready to produce music instantly? But that sort of rat hole that we fell down there actually leads me to another question. Like, what factors lead to bad audio? Because we're talking about different points in the sort of recording process or even post-production where things can go bad. I mean, Jane, you talked about a buzz. Now, you're saying you're removing that every time. Where's it coming from? Why haven't you fixed it? Do you
Right,
know?
exactly. I mean, I think it comes, I'm not sure if it comes from my mic or if it's coming from, I'm using Skype and call recorder, if it's coming in that way. But yeah, every time I'm pulling this out and I haven't figured out what it is yet. So it's easy enough for me in one click to strip it out. It's tiny, but
That's
it's
good.
enough.
It's good that you can strip it out. I mean, sometimes it can be like crazy stuff, like a light bulb, like the
Right.
CFL, or your microphone being too close to the monitor can have some like
Hmm.
electromagnetic interference. But I mean, you're saying it's easy to strip out because what I'm thinking is ground loop, and ground loops are absolutely the worst thing, like almost
Okay.
impossible to remove. Like that's what you want to make sure you don't have. But if you're getting rid of it, that's fine. But
Yeah.
ideally, you would find the source. So, if you ever have some spare time, it's definitely go around and like unplug. I
Okay.
mean, you only have USB microphones, so
Right.
that's
Right.
harder to test. But move the microphone around. It could be something in the environment. I mean,
Yeah, that's true. Maybe it's
who
a light
knows?
bulb or like a power strip or something like
It could,
that that's
yes, if you
causing
can plug it
something.
in some, yep, it could be.
I,
It a lot of
Uh,
times USB, the computer itself can cause a little bit of ground
mhm,
loop because there's a lot of stuff going on inside a computer.
I
mhm.
had a weird tower kind of desk, and the computer was at the bottom, and then you had a shelf, and then a place for your monitor. And it took me the longest time to figure out because I had this hum,
Uh-huh.
and it wasn't until the one day I'm listening in headphones, and I picked the microphone off the desk, and what it was is the computer being in the desk,
Yeah.
it vibrated the whole desk, and once I
Ah,
put
I've seen
and
that.
it went right up the stand into the microphone. So I ended up just getting a towel
Yep.
and sticking it under the mic stand. It was
Yep.
fun.
A mouse pad, a good old fashioned, those foam mouse pads make
right.
fantastic. Yet that happens a lot. Hard drives inside, we have iMacs that are all in one solutions that sit on the desktop, your microphone stand or your microphone
Right.
USBs right there, and it'll come up through the desk and right into the audio.
Well,
You're right. That's a
I
good one.
can't wait to try that because I'm recording some more tomorrow, so I'm going to see if that does
I don't
it
hear it
because
now, which is so there's another weird thing because
yeah.
I hear that usually I would pick that off, but
Well, maybe it's because I'm stacked on all these boxes. This is another pro tip
see,
here. See? Err.
there you go. She's getting she's
That is pro.
doing what she has to do to get the good audio, which
But
by the
yeah.
way, not an expensive solution there. I like it.
Right. I mean, I do have audio stands. I have like a pile of equipment over there, but this is my favorite little like quick setup.
That
So
sounds fantastic. So let's see. Bangs in the chat says I have a ceiling fan that generates 120 hertz hum. So I mean, it's weird stuff like that. I
oh
talk a
yeah.
lot about, it's oftentimes what's going on before you hit record. Like if you can get
Mhm,
that straightened out, that's
mhm,
mostly where you're going to affect the audio the most. It's all about
mhm.
getting it clean, and then you can do anything you want. So when I asked about what factors lead to bad audio, I don't know, Tyler, can you think of anything else? I mean, anywhere
Yeah,
along the chain before it gets in the microphone, after it gets put into an MP3 file.
I have dozens, but one I'm
Dozens.
gonna pick on that I see because I hear it happen pretty often is just a loud noise floor,
Mm.
which I think Google filters out pretty well. Like right now, I don't think any of us can really hear it because Google's just stripping out the silences in between for one thing, which is when it'll really come up most of the time, and also just kind of doing some processing that tries to reduce what you can hear through it. But if none of that processing happens in post, a lot of people will end up just having a hiss that just can really last through the whole thing. And worse yet can be if they add a noise gate, a very strong noise gate without removing the noise. So as they speak, you can hear this big noise swoosh in, and then it kind of washes away as they stop talking. And especially at live events, that's something I hear live podcasters have a big problem with because I think they're also recording in an unfamiliar environment. So you'll hear a lot of room noise and then it goes dead silent and then it comes back in and it can be so distracting. And when you're in a room and it's controlled, like right now, I can hear my fan spinning up on my laptop. And that kind of fan sound in Audition, which is what I use, it's very easy to remove that. It takes just a
Mhm.
few clicks. I don't know if what else does that? Does Logic have that kind of
I mean, it
filter as
depends
well?
on what filter you're using to do that. What are you
The
saying? I mean, does it say
noise
like,
removal.
Yeah.
okay, and
I
noise
use
removals,
Audacity. Oh, sorry.
yeah, and the noise removal in Audacity, there's a plugin for that.
Mhm.
It's actually, I used to use that over the one I used in an Apple Soundtrack Pro. I thought the Audacity one did a better job, but Tyler, you just got that RX I think you bought that, and it's amazing. At least
it is amazing. I wish we were before that sale. No, so I hope somebody else caught it on that sale. Are you using it already?
Yeah, I use it, and I got it on the sale. So every Black Friday, Cyber Monday, they put that on sale, and it's like this five plugin pack. But there's one plugin called Dialogue Denoise from Isotope, and I'll put that in. It's not that much, even when it's not on sale. But it has this thing called Dialogue Denoise, and it's basically a noise removal. But I'm telling you, it's so much better than everything else, and it's dead simple. Like, you don't have to know anything about it. It'll auto do it for you. And when I use it, I'm like, this is why in some cases other people's audio is better, because there are some really damn expensive plugins that I'm never going to purchase that make it as easy as this makes this. So this is not very hard. It's better than noise removal that you get from Audition or anything else, because you push that to a certain point, it sounds like you're underwater. It gets all warbly. I've pushed this thing way far, and it's magic.
So it's like a separate app? Wait, tell me.
It's a plugin for it goes into like Audition.
Would it go into Audacity too?
Yeah.
Will it? Isotope will work with Audacity? That's great. Yeah, because it's like
I can't think of the name of it, but it's
VST.
Yes.
What's it?
Yeah, VST.
Now I'm looking VST. Yes.
Okay,
VST.
you'll need to put all that in the notes. So
yes,
that I
know. This is the first time I've ever taken notes while we recorded to put in, because there's so many things we mentioned. I don't ever do this.
I think also next Black Friday, I'm gonna get so the one we got it's $150 usually, and I got it for $30. Next Black Friday, amazing. But each plugin gets quite a bit more expensive. I think then there's a Pro and there's a Studio version, and the Pro is I think $500, and Studio is $1,000. It really ramps up. But I might just keep adding until every Black Friday, because the tools they stack on, especially in the top one, they do things like not just static noise removal that's consistent throughout the voice recording, but they can remove background noise as well. So in the examples, there's coffee shop recordings and like field recordings, and they can really strip out anything that isn't the vocals, and it still does that amazing job. So that's one of those times where I can hear in other people's work when sometimes you can hear the money being paying off.
Yeah,
and this tool's amazing.
It gets frustrating when you start, because you are trying to figure out everything, and it's sometimes, and you hear these like better produced podcasts, and most of the time it's just they have the knowledge and the space and the gear. That's a little different than yours, but sometimes they have the tools that cost a lot of money. Because I have frustratingly, I'm like, why is their Skype so much cleaner than? And they've cleaned it up with tools that I just can't afford. Like this is one thing. We talked about the hiss and it going away. If you have a Skype guest, for me, I can never pull up Skype and not get a lot of hiss from it. And I hear other interviews on Skype, and I'm like, why does that sound so good? And I think it's just a matter of you get what you get when you pull up Skype half the time. Obviously, there's some things you can do to optimize it. But if you try to clean up that too much, it can sound weird. Also, if you drop it out when you're talking and they're not there, then you get the thing that like Tyler's talking about, where it's just completely noticeable. Dave, can you think of any other factors that lead to bad audio?
The phone, anytime the phone's involved, I know we talked about that with guests, it's okay, but I hear people that try to do a podcast over the phone. And just bandwidth. There are sometimes I feel bad because it's not that somebody can't afford the bandwidth. In some cases, it's just not there. Sometimes you live in a place where everybody thinks everybody has the internet. And I remember once I got interviewed by a really nice guy in South Africa, and he just said, look, where I'm at, we have horrible internet. And so it's going to break off about every, so-and-so. And he goes, so I'll call you back. I'll tell you where you left off, and we'll just pick up from there. And I'm like, and sure enough, probably like 10 times I'd be in the middle of an answer, and all of a sudden I'd hear boop, beep, and I'm like, and he'd call me right back. It's like, sorry, let's pick it up from here. And he set the stage. It's like, this is what's going to happen. It's okay. We'll get through it. And we made it through. So it was, you kind of do what you want to do. I know Gabe in the chat room says with the Audacity and also with Audition, you have to sample the noise and then you can move it out. And he says he actually records about 10 seconds of room tone or the sample, just so he has something to go in and grab.
Yeah,
So,
there's usually always a dead spot at least where you can grab the noise. And sometimes, in the movies when you're doing video, I mean, you record room tone to actually put noise in to your recording. People think that's
Mhm.
weird, but like Tyler's mentioning, like when you drop it out, when it's there and then it's gone, it's there, it's gone, that's when it's noticeable,
yeah.
So your podcast, there may be a situation where a noise floor of some type is actually beneficial to you. If you do have to put in a track, again, in that situation where I record in theaters, I put a shotgun microphone, stage right or left, and I point it up and over the crowd, and it gives me crowd ambient noise. And if I want to put noise gates on my hosts where it drops out, you're going to hear that over 5 microphones. But if I lay in that sort of subtle crowd audience noise, and it's okay because people know we're recording in a theater, you
Right.
want to hear that crowd. That
Mhm.
sort of gives you that nice level, continuous sound. And technically there's some noise there, but it actually works better than not having it. So
Well, if you think of any time you've seen a stand-up comedian, it would be very strange if it went perfectly silent
yeah,
as soon as they stopped talking.
yeah,
So just having that small bit, I think doing it live is the most important time
yeah,
to add that kind of effect.
yeah. Dave, add in some noise for us, would you? Because this is live and we need. Hey, so
Uh-oh.
in that example, Dave, that you're mentioning, in his case, I would work harder to try to get double enders going, right? I would have you record your audio and me record my audio, and that
Mhm.
way you remove, if your internet is the issue, you can
Yeah.
still connect, or maybe you're using phones or something. Remove that if you can. Remove the issue, and I think in most of these cases, that's what you want to do. If you know the issue, try to overcome it, try to mitigate it by removing it, getting around it. In a double ender, you only need the internet to communicate and hear the questions, and you're recording on your own side, and then you sync that in post. So you might do a little more work,
Mhm.
but it's totally worth it. It'll give you that better audio, right?
Yeah, that's where a Ringer or a
Yeah, you can
Zencaster,
use an app for it. There's
yeah,
Mhm.
or like
better
you said,
ways to accomplish it.
just connect over the phone and
Yeah,
have
just
the
connect over the
phone one
phone.
in ear and the microphone, and yeah, you'd
For
be
sure.
fine.
Yeah. Jane, let's
Yes.
see. What else do I have in here? When is your audio good enough? Like what makes you not? I don't know. I'm trying to think. You record
I,
audio. It sounds like you know what you're doing, so you don't have to
I know what I'm doing
decide.
like this much.
Yeah, you don't. I've heard your podcast. It sounds good.
I have an example of good enough. In fact, I'm going to do one here in a couple weeks where I solicit my audience to chime in on a question. And some people are kind of bassy, some people are not. And if I wanted to obsess over my audio, I could go in and EQ everybody so everybody sounded more or less the same. I ain't got that kind of time. And I go
Right.
in and I run it through Levelator, or I'll run it through Auphonic to get rid of the hiss. If something's really awful, I'll go in and maybe cut down on some of their bass or something like that. But for the most part, it's as good as like, what, it's good enough. And I was talking with somebody once in an event, and they said, yeah, those are, those need EQ'd. And I was like, yeah, I just don't have the time, but you're right. I probably should EQ those. But that person was an audio engineer.
Yeah, he's the only person who heard it.
Yeah, and I was
him
like,
and 2 other guys.
yeah. So you have to always remember that your audience is listening through audience ears, not podcaster ears.
Well, and I've started thinking about that lately too, that I'd spent a few months where I happened to be editing at home mostly, and my bigger headphones are at the office, and then I just have earbuds at home, and I've been editing with my earbuds. And I went back and started re-listening to stuff on my bigger headphones and started feeling kind of guilty for being so lazy. I mean, I kept thinking like, everybody just listens on earbuds anyway. They're listening through their phone speaker. Nobody can hear it. But it really is helpful to use. They don't have to be very good headphones, but loud sound isolating headphones that really give you the full presence of, say, if you're ever editing out parts, like you edit out a cough or something, you can accidentally just cut the breath so that the cut is too transparent. And that's something that's easy to miss when you're listening through earbuds instead of through proper headphones. So that's a time lately that I thought I was doing good enough. And in retrospect, I wasn't doing good enough. So I've gone back to trying to always use proper headphones when I'm editing myself.
This is where kind of having a podcast buddy, for lack of a better phrase, can come in handy. I just did on the podcast review show. This guy was getting really creative. He was doing a history show. I think he's all of maybe 23 or something like that. He was kind of adding in a little attitude here and there, but he did things in the background And I think sometimes we're the worst, especially if we're mixing in sound effects and music and things like that. And because he had made the sound effects and the music, they were way too up in the mix, because I'm sure he's like, look, I worked hard on that noise. I want to make sure it's heard. And it's like, yeah, we definitely heard it because we couldn't understand what you were saying anymore. So I think sometimes if you can have somebody that will listen to your show and then talk about it like you're not in the room, that's always great to have.
You just made me think of one. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask you a question. So,
oh, go ask. Okay, so you made me think of one that I just did today. So I interviewed this really cool dad whose son has a heart defect, and he has this really popular Instagram where he's tracking all this stuff. But at one point, about halfway through, I started hearing this like clicking noise, and I thought he was hitting his mic cord. And sometimes I don't like to interrupt the flow and tell them, it's time. And then it kind of kept going on. And it got too far where I knew that it was going to be so much to edit out. So I kind of left it. Well, at the end, he told me the whole time at that point he was playing ball catch with his son, who's like 4, to keep him busy while he was on the show. So I'm like, well, at least I can say that to the listeners. Like, when you get to halfway through and you start hearing it, because I don't know how to edit it out. It's like within every single answer, it's the whole time.
That goes right. That's perfect. Goes into my question, because I was wondering, how do you know when to stop editing and just publish? Because some people will fall down the editing hole. They'll do a half-hour interview, and it takes them 8 hours to produce every podcast. And so, and this can be difficult. People want to remove every and or like in your case, maybe they decided they didn't know that story, and they said, man, I got to figure out how to get that out of there. It's super distracting. How much editing do you do? And then how do you know like when it's time to just be done?
Yeah, for me, I have I probably edit about an hour for each episode, and the episodes are an hour long. So I listen back to the entire thing, and I listen like when I'm doing crazy things, like on the bike or something at the gym or in the in the car, and I just take notes of where I want to make changes.
So you're mostly editing for content. You're not. Are you not dealing with the ums and ahs? Are you leaving all the ums and ahs and all that awkward stuff in there?
Yeah, I used to take out my own ums and ahs, but now I leave them all in. I got better at not saying it as much. So I do leave all, but I just say it.
Live is different.
So I leave a lot of that in. There's only when I do have to do massive editing for something like that. Like I just did one recently where the person I was interviewing took long pauses before he would answer. I had to go squeeze that down, because even I was
though, because they're super easy, because it's just dead
I know
space.
I see the block. I know that was so much easier. But right, I don't do a lot of that kind of content editing. It's more about if I hear something glitchy, I'll edit that out. Or if I hear like if there's something there, just actually, you might have already figured this out. Mostly I'm editing out when I'm talking too much. I'm like, wait, I talk too much. This isn't about me. And I'd go back and edit that out.
I do that because when I'm talking to the person, it's a conversation.
Right.
I want it to be an interview. So a lot of times I'm giving them kind of a Me Too story. Like I did this thing, and I'm like, hey, I did the same thing. And did you know that so-and-so? Well, that's fine. But I'm going to take that out of the finished product. It's like I'm here to spotlight my guest, not, show off how much I know or whatever. So that's always something I do.
And that is a true story. That is mostly what I edit out is myself.
Yeah.
Nice. Speaking of audio issues, I mean, I'm noticing tonight, like the Hangouts is not enjoying us stepping on each other. So when that happens, this is a Skype issue too. So this is something you can think about when you're recording via Skype. If you are actually recording the Skype part, not doing double ender, when you talk over the top of someone else, and that's hard not to do in a conversation. It's a little easier here because we can visually see each other, so you get those verbal cues. But you have better audio on Skype generally if you leave the video off. But when we say something and someone else comes in, it basically cuts off one person. It decides it can't handle that, and I'm hearing it here. Whatever. I mean, it's not killing the content. I didn't bring it up to be like, hey, everybody, don't talk unless you're talked to. I mean, it's just what it is in this case. And this show, I mean, we're talking, one of the reasons I'm able to do this show is because production is minimal. I mean, we use this. There is no intro music. I literally put this into the editor. I do a little. I'll do some cleanup on my own audio because I can't help myself. And then, but I have to, all the guests you guys are all on a mixed track, and so I give it some basic EQ and I just push it out the door. It just goes, unless I know there was like, we had some weird connection issue and there's just a big gap in there, I will take that out. But otherwise, Roundtable's not edited for content ever, other than just big technical problems. And I don't want the audience to have to sit there the way you had to sit there during live. So I'll get that out of there. But that's it. There's almost no post production in terms of like ums and ahs, and so this show's a lot more raw, and it's actually what it's supposed to be. You know, in this case, I think it lends something to this show because this show is just a, hey, let's jump on the microphone, let's just have a conversation. So it goes to it. Whereas other shows I have are I would say more produced, a more polished end product. Dave, you do a million shows.
Mhm.
How much editing are you doing? You know, I mean, School of Podcasting, that has a lot of editing. You have a lot of segments.
A lot of segments. I'm better at it now because I have more notes to start. I've learned that lesson. I still every now and then think I can do it, and I'll go in with no bullet points. And when I'm recording it for the third time, I'm like, let's just write down some bullet points because I go all over the place. I used to obsess over transition music. Does this country twang go with the theme of, microphones over $200? I'm like, now it's just like, I need music here. Go to my music folder. This will work fine in, out, that whole 9 yards. So I don't go as crazy. I've also learned if you're doing anything with sound effects, man, have I learned this lesson. You will spend 45 minutes looking for the world's perfect drum roll, or you can just go to audiojungle.net and buy one for $3, and it takes about 2 minutes.
Use code Dave Jackson.
Yes. So that's something that I don't, and I will catch myself doing that, looking for the favorite lightning strike or something like that. I'm like, you know what? Let's just go buy one. This is ridiculous. So
yeah, that can be a huge time suck for sure. And let's see, in the chat, Gabe says, I leave the consistent level job to Auphonic. And Auphonic.com, you can 2 hours free. That's excellent. If like you don't want to do this post-production stuff, it does a lot of stuff for you. The key is if you can record things pretty well, like I said, just clean and consistent, then you can just throw it through Auphonic and it does a lot of great things for you. So there are other options to do things if you don't want to learn, post-production per se. But, that is definitely a place where it can get to that part and your audio can get worse because, again, noise removal, people will over compress. They'll do stuff trying to make their audio better, and instead they make it worse. But Tyler, I can't leave out. We've got 2 video people here, at least that I know of. Jane, maybe you do video, but I'm a video guy, and video or podcast too. I feel like that's my T-shirt. Oh, it's gonna say video or podcast too. Don't steal that. Nobody see live.
Oh, we already
sucks.
got it. We already got it.
No,
it's
I'm
ours.
gonna make it first.
Buying the domain as we speak.
Oh, Dave. It's copyrighted. Copyright Ray Ortega 2017. I will sue you, Dave. Tyler, good audio in video is a little tougher. You can't put this like nice microphone right in your face per se. Depends on the video, I guess. But anything, if you're doing a video podcast, we do generally YouTube, and it's expensive to do video podcasts as well. But what's the difference? Is there? I mean, you got the high pure 40s right in your face for your audio podcast. Good audio, but is it harder to do audio for video? We lost Tyler. He's not on
again.
Mute. He's not on mute. I don't know why.
Oh
We'll come back.
He's completely gone now.
Okay, is it just me? Is it just me, or would there be like this super dream of having like a super pro person edit one of my shows and just show me what it's like?
That sounds great.
There's Ted.
And
What do you mean? You mean you want to hire someone to edit or someone to show you?
Well, actually, probably show me would be better because then I can do it again, and then I wouldn't be depressed because it's one time. But yes, I would love to do that. And actually, that's the thing. My intro, I had an audio engineer do the intro, and it sounds a little bit different. Like there's just a little bit raspier, and I can't figure out how to make it happen. And I don't have contact with that person, so I'm like, I've got to figure this out. I need to find someone who can listen to A and listen to B and go, this is what you need to do.
Yeah, and that can be tough. I mean, depending on what how they process it, it can be tough.
I know, it's tricky. It's very tricky.
Tyler,
so, are you back,
you
Tyler?
hear me now? I hope so.
Yeah, you're back.
I didn't change anything in between, I promise. I also promise my podcasts don't sound like. I can't wait to hear how bad I sound, and so I'm sorry for ruining this episode,
we know what
everybody.
you're saying.
I was going to say with video, it just generally does sound worse. A good video mic, you're always facing extra challenges. Like a lav mic that you put on a person, if you kind of want to hide it, isn't a really non-optimal spot. It's usually kind of lower on the chest. So the chin is blocking the sound input to it. So there's been times where I've tried using a lav mic to record a podcast, and next to it are other real podcast microphones that you're speaking directly into. And there's so much more clarity out of a mic that is in the right place. And it's not even all about the actual microphone. Lav mics can sound great, but the placement of them sacrifices a lot. And the same thing happens with a boom mic. Typically, you can't boom it in, which, that's just a mic on a stick. You can't bring it in nearly as close as a podcast mic. So, it'll be between 2 or 5 feet away, because depends on what the width of your shot is. So you just can't get that same proximity. That becomes the biggest issue with all of it, is really proximity. And as you move a mic further away, the sound of your room starts to matter a lot more. Like, I'm in a cement room that's very echoey. So in my YouTube videos, I sound quite a lot worse because of that extra distance. That distance gives the room a chance to reverberate a lot more. So in a podcast, I can get rid of a lot of that by bringing the mic right up to my mouth, and that helps. So there's a lot more challenges in video because of hiding it, but people are also a bit more forgiving with it. As long as your audio is good, I find people have a bit lower expectations because they're not listening as closely. They're also watching. They're engaged on more levels.
There's something about the visual when you can see the room someone's in.
Yeah.
It lends, so you're like, oh, it's a little echo, but it fits because look, I mean, I can see her in a cement room, and not that like that audio production. You're like, oh, he's in a cement room. It's going to sound like reverb. It's just something about seeing it and here it just goes with the image.
A simple example is like if you see somebody standing at a traffic light and you're more forgiving of hearing them than if it was an audio only experience. Be like, why do I have to listen to all this garbage noise? So context adds a lot of what you're willing to accept.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Well, what else? I don't know if I have anything else on my list.
I had one thing. Oh, wait, I was going to say, when you were talking about talking over each other, and I tried to interrupt, and my mic apparently wasn't working, so I couldn't talk over you. But
again on purpose.
That's the main good enough that I will do in my edits. I usually try to go through and actually edit the whole thing, not removing every but just paying attention to each sentence. That's like, okay, that works. But what I'll always take out, even if I'm in a rush, is those either a gap where Skype just has a time response, especially for a laugh. If you tell a joke and there's a 3-second pause and the person laughs, it just does not come across as authentic. Like you can hear that. Yeah, exactly. And that can really kill momentum, and it just doesn't feel natural. And it's relatively a quick thing to fix and quick to spot. So as long as you have multiple tracks of audio and you zoom out, you can usually see where one person ended and the other person started, and all those gaps are pretty visible. So I try to trim all those down to virtually nothing so that there's always consistency without gaps. And then also, if we're talking over each other, I'll remove the interruption. So if only one so that you can't tell that it happened as much as possible.
Yeah, and I mean, there was a key element in there that if he picked it up, he said multiple tracks, right? So this is a huge factor in being able to, I mean, you can't do that if people are mixed, essentially, if they're recorded into like, you record on something like a Zoom H1 that both the people who were talking went into a stereo signal and it wasn't panned and all that garbage. It would be a mix, and you couldn't do what Tyler's saying necessarily. And so at work, I do multiple tracks all the time, and 2 people will talk and it's okay. In that case, they have a really strong connection, and Skype doesn't always do that. And it's easy for me to slip the audio left and right, and you get to hear what each person said. And that just, that's not an audio quality issue, but it's a, just being able to hear what people are saying. And that can change a podcast. Is almost always critical. Like what someone says, you're like, they're gone. If it was mixed, you wouldn't be able to do that. So
it's funny. There's also like a real life mixing that happens if you record in the same room as somebody, especially if there's reverb. If it's a fully controlled room where there's no bounce, it's not the same thing. But if you can hear the sound of the room heavily, it's much more challenging to like if somebody tries to interrupt and doesn't succeed, you can't scoop them out because you can hear them through the other mic, or sometimes you'll hear the end of the reverb bleeding through the next sentence. So when people are together, you actually can edit it much less than if they're in totally independent rooms. You can be a lot more aggressive about what you cut out.
Yeah, it gets a lot. It's so tricky when you get multiple people in a room together because you get those bleed, you get the the bleed
Yeah,
going through the other microphone. So.
It's like a live musical performance.
Yeah.
Is that an example of good enough though? Because I know we all would love to have separate tracks when you can, but is that a case where like sometimes you just got to go with the stereo and you have everybody adjust their volume when you first start out and you
this is not, I mean, I'm separate from you guys the way I'm recording here, but that's it. Like I can't separate any of you. And so, you know, we join the hangout 15 minutes before we go live, ideally. And I work on those things. Like as we just have a casual conversation, I'm trying to balance those levels. And, you know, I'm telling Tyler his mic is cutting in and out. You know, you work on those things hopefully a few minutes before and you find solutions. So we found a solution and I'm trying to balance that audio. It doesn't have to be perfect, but use your ear. Your ear is going to be fantastic. And if you just need to get close, it doesn't have to be perfect. And that'll allow you to go into post-production or use something like a phonic and it'll do the auto leveling for you. But yeah, take a few minutes before you record and try to balance your side versus the other side. A lot of people have this, you know, that's their primary thing when they talk about Skype and issues. They say, my audio is fine, but the guest is so much lower.
Yeah.
And then if they haven't done separate tracks, it's going to be harder. And separate track is easy when it's one-on-one because you can turn any mixer into a multi-channel by panning left and panning right. Get in touch if you're wondering about that. But there's Skype recording software and that separates the tracks for you. So there's really no reason not to do it. And it'll save the day in a lot of cases. Unless you have, like right now, you have 4 people talking. This would each person you add starts to stack the complexity. Yeah, so I'm saying one-on-one, which is the case for most podcasts. They do a one-on-one interview. Anytime you go past 2 people, it gets ugly. And those are the only emails I get because I'm telling you, the one-on-one's easy to figure out. So when people can't figure out how to separate more than 2 people, they email me and like, and it's these complex setups and they want to do these crazy stuff. And I'm like, oh my God, yeah, you're going to need a lot different setup.
Ray, I really think you should start recording Roundtable as a quadruple ender where we all send you giant WAV files and you sync them all.
I tried that. I tried
Did you?
that.
It sounds like a nightmare.
I think on my YouTube channel, there's this thing called Soundation. It was a plugin that Hangouts had, and it was for music. Look, this isn't hard. Like why there isn't a plugin that doesn't do this for me, that it should record. Everyone's audio should record to their own machine.
Totally.
If I was a coder, if I was this would already exist. Yes, trust me. When I started the Roundtable, being who I am and wanting good sound, I tried to make that happen, but no. And this is fine. It's good enough. It's totally good enough. The Roundtable is great. I mentioned that I'm recording separate.
No, you said it good enough the first time.
I won't edit that out. Self-editing real time. I'm doing it in studio because what we're capturing here in real time, your audio coming to me live and my audio, of course, going to the recorder, is so much better than what it's going to be when it hits the archive and goes to YouTube, because YouTube's going to compress it and they're going to kill the audio. They're going to
I don't understand why they're so aggressive about that.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
It doesn't have to be that way.
They host 8K video, Tyler, but they can't give us like 320 kilobits a second.
Yeah, give me 64-bit MP3s.
Yeah, makes no sense. But you know, that's how YouTube's staying alive, I guess. But yeah, so just doing that one thing gives me so much better audio than if I, you know, just ripped out the archive. However, things happen, recordings crash, and I have ripped out the archive and put it in the feed because the content's good. It's not horrible, that audio. So do what you can, take what you get, publish it, and move on. Like, always improve. As long as I think you're always making a concerted effort to improve, you know, you may not need to, you get to a point where like, that's good enough, right? So, all right, well, we could probably keep going on, but I think we're at that point. I'll let people go work on their audio.
Yes.
Actually produce some content. But I'll thank you for coming on to the Roundtable, of course, and then let us know where we can find your podcast, your great sounding podcast, and some of the people will come out and check you out, I'm sure. So, right. Dave Jackson, as always, thanks for joining us. Your check is in the mail.
Yeah, I have to throw in one last bumper sticker.
Please.
And it's from Dan. It's from Hall of Fame podcaster Dan Class. He said when you go to a comedy club and there's 3 different comedians and one was okay and one just killed and one was like, they all used the same mic. And so it's not always, if you're thinking about upgrading your microphone is probably good enough. So, and you can find me over at schoolofpodcasting.com.
Yeah, it's tricky because, you know, there were people who will hear this round and they'll think, oh my God, these people, they're so focused and like, it's not about the audio quality. It's not about your microphone. It's about the content. Yeah, sure. Whatever. It is, that's primary. But if people, can't hear
right
well, then they never receive that content. So it's a blend, right? It's not something to ignore. It's also not something to obsess over for sure. And, that is our job here that we get paid handsomely for, to go down rabbit holes. We get paid so much. Matter of fact, I'm just going to hang it up. This is the last round. Jane, thank you so much for joining us on your first roundtable.
Well, thank you for having me. And now that I've been to one, I feel like I have to have a bumper sticker. So what I was going to say is that when you look at Not Good Enough to Post and like the elite, velvety sound of NPR, there's so much room in between. So there's so much room to play and learn and grow. And that's the coolest thing that I love about podcasting myself. And you can find me over at glisteningparticles.com, where I talk with lots of crazy people that are really cool and amazing. So come on and check it out. They're not really all crazy. Just that's mostly me.
That's a good way to get people to listen, though. You're like, I got to hear what this crazy stuff is. I got to do it.
Exactly.
Tyler thinks that makes 2 times in the book, and we've had challenges each time, but hey,
next time,
have
like 6 microphones lined up, ready to go.
This is how Tyler gets back on the round. I get what you're doing.
Yeah. So that next time, I'll get it right.
It'll be better.
Yeah. Yes. No, thanks a lot for having me again. I really enjoyed it. And I wanted to throw just a random recommendation out there that I've really been enjoying this week is Forecast. If anybody hasn't used it, from Marco Arment. Forecast, if anybody uses Overcast to listen to their podcasts, it is his podcast preparation tool. So it does encoding and chapter markers and all the metadata that you want in a really smart way. So and it's free. So I strongly recommend checking that out. And then myself, I just launched a new podcast 2 days ago called go to stallmanpodcast.com and you can hear it. And that's just like personal, like I just want to talk about whatever I want to talk about when I want to. But I also have a photography podcast called Cameras or Whatever.
Very cool. Yes, I did see that came out. We could actually go down another 20 minutes of the audio quality conversation and talk about how he uses the lame encoder, which is kind of lame, but does that matter versus Fraunhofer? I actually probably have kind of thought that it does, but I think there are some arguments that it doesn't. So you know what? I trust Marco. He does good stuff. And so, yeah, you should definitely check that out. It may speed up your workflow, because the key is like this stuff is hard. It's hard to produce on a weekly basis or a consistent basis. And, if you spend all your time trying to perfect your audio or something else, you'll quit. And that's not the better alternative, right? So good enough, publish, move on, produce another thing, and sign up. Podcastersroundtable.com/guest will get you on a round here. And that's it. We will see you next time. Wave goodbye. See you.
All right. Thank you.